Welcome to the Nordic Mythology Podcast. I'm Daniel Farron, Cohen of the company Horns of Odin, and I'm joined, as always, by Dr. Mathias Nordvig.
Hello, everyone. This time we're joined by Helena Hals, who's a historian and author, and has studied, among other things, the Sámi at the University of Troms in Norway. Welcome to the show, Helena.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. I know we've tried to set this one up a few times and we've had bumps in the road, I think, and things have come up on both ends. So it's nice to finally get here and do the show.
Yeah, I agree.
Awesome. It's a very nice little setup you've got. You've got some traditional clothes on.
Yes, I thought I would dress up for the occasion. I also have a backdrop, but as you can see, the illusion is shattered a bit in the edges. So I'm not really in a longhouse. I'm at home.
Oh, you
surrounded by proper Ikea furniture, it looks like.
Yes.
Yes.
Of course. I mean,
me too. That's my go-to. There's an Ikea in Denver, and I go there and get my stuff.
Oh, there's one everywhere.
Yeah. But it makes me feel better as a Scandinavian, that I can always get IKEA furniture everywhere in the world. That way I can always feel at home.
Is IKEA big in Scandinavia, or is it one of those things that's big everywhere else but?
I'd say it's big in Scandinavia. Yeah.
Or is it,
in Norway, we don't really have IKEA in the north. So it's in the south. In Oslo, there are like 3 IKEAs, and here it's I think the closest would be to drive to the Finnish border.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So across Sweden to Finland. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah.
Hey, you gotta get that furniture.
To be fair, actually, you have to hear this. So when I was a kid in Denmark, I think some of the oldest IKEA stores outside of Sweden are like in Denmark and Norway and possibly Iceland. I don't know. And we would go to IKEA, and you know how they're, the signs are like blue and yellow as like the Swedish flag. Back then they weren't. Back then in Denmark they were red and white, like the Danish flag.
Really?
They literally tricked us to go to think that it was a Danish company.
They got you.
Yeah, no, I was like, the day I found out, I was like, wait, what the fuck? They're Swedish.
And once you were hooked on that sweet flat pack furniture, then they did the switcheroo
fine.
and gave you the showed you the true colors.
It's fine. They did, for me, they didn't have to pretend. It's fine.
I didn't know that.
Oh, he's full of interesting use.
Yeah, fun facts. Cool. Yeah.
So one thing I have to ask is, how does my beard look?
Very well trimmed.
Because I gave into my inner vanity and bought a heated beard comb.
Ooh.
I keep seeing them about and my beard was all curled. I was like, I'm gonna have to try one. And apparently they're not as easy to use as you would expect.
I think it looks very well. Yeah, you did a good job.
I always get these kinks from wearing a mask all day.
Right, yeah. Yeah, me too.
Oh no, I wear a mask for proper, well, I don't want to say proper reasons, but like
right, yeah.
I mean, I wear like a dust mask, which is a little tighter than the little paper ones for stopping COVID.
Yeah. No, I mean I wear masks on a daily basis now because we have to when we teach. So everybody is masked. I don't know what my students look like. They all look like ninjas,
Oh, it'd be weird when they all have to take them off and just reveal the face.
Exactly.
You don't know what's going on under them, under those masks.
Everybody seems so serious all the time because you can't see they're laughing as well.
Exactly.
With the
yeah, you can't see smiles. It's quite
yeah.
quite sad. I mean, to be fair, over here, wherever you go, nobody seems to wear a mask anymore. It's almost like COVID didn't exist when you go to the shop. You get some of the elderly people are still wearing them, but I know, and they lifted the whole legality behind wearing masks. For the first week, pretty much everyone's still wearing masks. And then now it's like everyone's going, you know, fuck it. Either they've lost it or forgotten it. It's like, well, I don't have to wear it anymore. And it's pretty much kind of distant memory, I guess, until the winter, I guess.
Well, yeah, no, that's, you know, I hope we don't get a rude awakening with all that stuff. How is that in Northern Norway where you were at, Helena?
Well, we're lucky. It's we don't have it as much. There are some small outbreaks in the neighboring villages, but it's not comparable with the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm.
In southern Norway, it's of course worse, but out here it's no. Yeah, I feel bad because I know how lucky we are.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not that used to wearing masks at all.
So what is the population of North Norway? Because I know obviously the bulk of the population is around the south and around sort of the Oslo area. Yeah. And when you get the higher up you get, the more sparsely populated it is.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm terrible with numbers.
Okay.
I wouldn't know. But yeah, it's a huge contrast also for Norwegians. They there's this divide, with this division between the north and the rest, you know, civilization, and then those stubborn Northlings, you know.
Oh, I feel like I know all too well about
focus
that.
too much on the big parts where the population is, and then they forget about us in the north.
Right. Yeah.
That feels like that feels like the north-south divide in England.
Sorry.
So that's like our divide over here. I mean, it's not as extreme because I think it's much more sparsely populated in the north of Norway than the north of England, but we still have a kind of north-south divide where people do get, we seem to get forgotten about by, you know, the lawmakers in Parliament in London. It's like, you guys up there, you just get on with it.
Yeah.
I think the largest town, that would be Tromsø, right? So that's
that would be a city. Yeah.
And that's, I think Tromsø is around 50,000 if I remember correctly, but I'm just riffing off memory right now.
This is where Shan's gonna earn his money and Google it and then pop it in the chat for us. Hopefully. But even, I mean, 50,000 is not big for a city. Well,
it's Scandinavian standards, if you ask me. It's sort of like a decently sized city. But
that's, you know, I mean, but that's kind of where what I was getting at when I asked for a population size, I guess, because I live in Huddersfield, which is it's a big-ish town, but I think our population is maybe 120, 130,000 people. So that's a small town in England, but it's a lot of,
that's like fourth or third largest town in Denmark.
Okay, Shan's done it.
71,000 as of 2014. Okay, yeah, there you go.
That still feels very small.
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
so I think to you know, because we got to have a lot of American listeners, a lot of British listeners, and people all over Europe, I guess, that are outside of Norway. So kind of, I think hopefully that'll put into perspective the size of the place we're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, where I live, we have 20 houses and no shop, so that would be a great perspective.
Yeah, that sounds like heaven, to be fair.
Yeah, and we have the beach and we have the marshes and the mountains behind us, so it's we get a bit territorial. So it's like, who is walking on our beach? You know, it's like we're so used to, you know, it being completely empty just for us. Yeah. It's a very remote, easy way of living. Very different from city life.
20 houses. I mean, I could probably see 20 houses from my window. That's, I mean,
and here they're spread out, you know, along one road. Yeah.
Do they ever go for sale, or do they just get passed down?
No, they just Yeah, they do. They're empty for a long period of time, so they kind of deteriorate and they look like ruins. And then suddenly there's this person from the south who buys it as a summer house and fixes it.
I was just about to say that. Do the rich people come and buy them as their second homes?
Yeah.
Because
But today, you can work from anywhere, so people also move to these locations, and I think it's getting more in. It's like a fashion to move away from the city, and yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's the same. We have the same up here in the mountains. I mean, I'm about an hour away from downtown Denver, and there's like a lot of people who are moving up here because they can work remotely. And like where I live, it has no name. It's just, you know, in the woods next to the highway. It's like off the highway. So but I mean there's a whole metropolitan area just down there on the other side of the mountains where there's like a 2-point-something million people living. It's like weird when you go down there and you're like, let me escape back to my mountain as quickly as possible.
Just a few months ago, we got a street name and a house number. So
nice.
Now we are very cool.
You're official.
Cool. Yeah. That's very similar to where my mom lives. That's also like, you know, 4 houses along a road in the countryside, and it doesn't really have a name or anything like that.
When we make our millions from podcasting, we will have to buy a little summer home in the north of Norway, and we can just go and podcast there.
Oh, hell yeah.
Hell yeah. I don't think it's ever going to happen. I don't think we're going to make millions, but if we ever do, then that's another reason for everyone to subscribe to Patreon /Nordic Mythology Podcast. Get that little plug in. Okay, let's talk about the Sámi, because this is something that I know absolutely nothing about, and I'm quite embarrassed that I know very little. And I'm going to say this because I don't ever mind sounding stupid on the podcast, I guess, that my only real or first introduction of the Sámi was from Vikings, the TV show, when Björn has that little interaction with the lady that comes down from the mountain and he marries. And that's literally the only time I've ever, or at least the first time I heard of them. And I'm sure there's plenty of people listening to this that are also in that position. So I think we should just start at the beginning of who they are or who they were. Do they still exist?
They still exist, yes.
Who they are then. Thank you. See, that's the ignorance that you're dealing with, Helena. So I do apologize.
It's okay. So the Sámi, I think when talking about them from a historical point of view, the easiest way would be to think about language. So the first people who who came to Norway, or what is present-day Norway, the first people, they were groups of people. They didn't arrive at one time. They didn't arrive all together. Small groups from different directions. And what we see is that we have some groups belonging to the Germanic language tree, language family, and we have other groups talking in languages which belong to the Uralian language group. So today we could, talk about ethnicity, but it's very difficult talking about it, especially way back then, because in the beginning, these groups of people, they didn't necessarily express themselves so culturally. What happens is that in the moment they meet each other, they make contact and they meet other groups with other languages and other maybe other traditions and other way of life. They start to accentuate these differences and they start to show which group they belong to. Mm-hmm. So you could have like these like hairstyle and makeup and ornamentation, stuff like that. So through like these differences, they get more visibly as time goes on. But in the beginning, like in the Iron Age, it's very difficult to pinpoint. And also because these groups, they in some areas they were isolated, while in other areas they worked together, they influenced each other, and had these long-lasting friendship ties, and even marriage, and even so these groups, they interlock and they get intertwined also with the DNA, and then it becomes a whole question: what is ethnicity, and what is how to divide them. So the most fruitful way of thinking is not to have a rigid line in the middle, but rather think of it like we have hybrids, we have groups, and they have this this identity with the group, not necessarily with either Uralian or Germanic, but with their own group, and we have these crossing lines. Yes, it's but today the Sámi have this very recognizable how's that called? Outfit. Yeah, they wear it like on the national day, and also there is a Norwegian one, and it looks very different, and it's very recognizable. So most people today, when they think of Sámi, they have that image. They think about the Sámi and the lifestyle from the last century, and at that point it was very different from the Norse population. So
when I was in Oslo, we went to the National Cultural Museum, and some of the Sámi outfits in there are absolutely stunning. There's some really beautiful garments, but I'm guessing, like you said, they're more of a modern thing.
Yeah, but you can see like the techniques, they were used in like by both groups, and they are very influenced by each other. So you can see like patterns overlapping, and also like ornamentation styles, and then forms and shapes. It's but I like it. It's a very romantic thing. It's very it's very two people building this this country together. That becomes very clear when you study the early history.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's I think a lot of people just jump to Vikings, or at least what they consider would be Vikings, and completely forget about maybe the Sámi or their influences they had on the country, which is a shame, really. It's almost like an afterthought, I think, to most people, if even a thought at all. So just get back to, so you mentioned Uralian.
Yeah.
Where's that?
Well, it's a whole different language tree. So it's the same tree that has today's Hungarian, Finnish language in it, but it's I should have had a picture. Google it. The Germanic, the Indo-European, Google it. It's way better than me explaining. But the point is that it's very far apart from the Germanic. It's a very wide gap. But the cool thing is that back then, what we see is that words were taken into the other language. So, for example, the Norwegian word for fox, the animal, is rev, and that is from a Sámi word, and it was adapted at a very early point in time. And it's very interesting for someone studying language or a historian, because the words adapted, they tell a bit about life back then. So the trading goods, like the stuff that the Sámi specialized in because they knew it was valuable for the other group, those type of words, like related to furs and bone and marine oil, sea mammals, land mammals, hunting, trapping, that stuff, a lot of Sámi words are taken into the Norwegian language. And the other way around, we have words related to farm life, like grains and dairy, iron, stuff like that. And you can see it's, so they traded a lot, and it was very profitable for both parties and very important to understand the growth of and all the whole basis of the Viking Age, really, the resource basis. And it's often forgotten. You just said the Sámi aren't mentioned that often, and it's true, but it's also the same with the northern region. Most series and films, documentaries, they talk about the situation in the south, and they show villages and big trading centers with a lot of buildings, you know, and it's and they focus on that, but they forget about the whole resource flow that is from the north. It's the whole groundwork for the rest. So it's,
yeah, I mean, even from before the Viking Age, we have Borg in Lofoten, right? Which is a center of trade and power that is taking in items that you can identify their origin all the way to Spain or North Africa in some cases as well, and of course sending material, presumably hunted furs and also reindeer, right, southwards. So yeah, you're totally right. There's, you know, when it comes to Norwegian history writing, and there's a lot of focus on Vestlandet and the general Bergen area, right, or the Viken stretch with Vestfold. There's so much more to be done and worked on when it comes to the north, and how the north was a basis for a lot of accumulating a lot of wealth in the south.
When you go way back, you can see that the northern region has been growing very steadily, very continuously throughout the whole Iron Age, just getting bigger, more powerful, and like have this very different scenario back like in the south, where you have all these internal wars. It's very unstable. It's and also you can see it when you look at population growth. It's a very big difference, and it's only because the north, you know, they were the losers at the end. You know, when Norway was unified as one country, they lost. And then it's, of course, it's the winners who tell history. And it's like you know, they push it a bit aside, and it's kind of forgotten. But when you look at the big lines, it's the northern region, which is the most steady and powerful and peaceful, and just grows and grows and grows all throughout. And it's just at the very end, you know, that they lose.
They lose out, and yeah, no, as you say, the winners, they write history, and they lie. They lie so much. I'm talking to you, Snorri Sturluson, through the ages here. Holy shit, that Heimskringla compilation, my friend. There's a lot of things to be said for a very strong focus on the western, southwestern part. And I mean, he's got his stories about Håkon the Good, who goes to Trøndelag and Møre and all that stuff. And that is all, you know, manufactured history that Snorri is making for.
Sure, he just had a small area in the western, you know, and he had some alliances, but he didn't conquer the whole. He didn't unify the whole, because it was already unified. It's just, you know, the whole north was already a stable network of chieftains, and
that's why they're busy talking about all the trolls that live in Hålogaland. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd lie. If I won the war, I'd lie. I'd be like, yeah, they're all rubbish. I'm really good. Of course you would.
Of course you would.
We do the same with ourselves, you know, you tell your story about who you are all throughout your life again and again. And every time it's different, you know, you tell yourself a different story about you now compared to what you did for 10 years ago. And so history doesn't exist. It's just our own narrative that gives us meaning and identity.
And unless you're looking for pity, you're always a badass in those stories, right?
Of course. If I was writing it, it would be one of two things. Either they were just really rubbish and I'd just say like they smelt or something, you know, just really dig in, or they'd be like all 7 foot tall giant humans and I'd be like, yeah, and I beat them. So what does that say about me? And that's the way that it'd go. And if I do that, then no doubt that's been done throughout history many, many times.
But the thing with Norwegian sources is very interesting because, you know, when they write about history, they write about their, you know, about heathens. So you have this very important Christian viewpoint. But with the sources from here and also, of course, from Iceland, they were not talking about any heathen. They were talking about their own forefathers. So then in these sources, you also get these explanations, you know, so that it would be more acceptable for present day readers, their public from then, back then, how to relate to these heathens, you know, and how can we be proud of heathen forefathers. And I love it. It's so fascinating, especially when you can find several sources describing the same event or several editions of the same saga. It's so cool because you can see that there are alterations, and it's almost, it's like, you know, studying psychology. It's fascinating to discuss stuff like that. You know, why did they make those changes? Why did they feel it was necessary?
So would the Sámi have come when they migrated, or at least the people who became the Sámi tribes, would they have come up through Finland and around that way, or would it have just trickled up through from the south of Norway?
Yeah, mostly from the other route from Finland, like from north and then down. But it's difficult, and also, of course, also from the interior, so through Sweden. It depends a bit on when you're talking, like in the beginning when the ice was retreating, so the very first people, they had to come along the coast because that was the area where the ice first disappeared. So we can see some spots with very early habitation, and people can, you know, they came with the boats, canoes, stuff like that, but also walking along the coast from the north. So it's like, and it's very difficult to pinpoint who was first. It's and of course it doesn't matter at all because it's just small groups and they came in the same period of time. And with every new discovery, you know, this is a bit older, this is a bit older, but I think the most healthy point of view would be to say that they came at the same time in different groups, in different areas.
So, I mean, it's cold and rugged up there. So what makes them stick around there and not, I guess, carry on down to the south of Norway, where it may be a little bit easier to live? Well,
the land is very rich on resources.
Okay.
And remember that like along the coastal region, it's not that harsh. The winters are actually mild and the summers are nice. It's the interior which is tougher.
Okay.
So the coastal region, you have this it's both. When you think of all the resources, you have these small areas where you have both in like freshwater, you have the freshwater fish, you have a natural harbor like as you know, before you could build a harbor, you would have this landing space for your boats. You would have a hunting area nearby, even bog ore, you know, to make iron, even though that wasn't done as much here in the north because they likely imported everything from the log. But anyway, you could have it all, you know, if you were to find a unique, perfect spot where you had all the resources available to you, it would be here. Well, in the south, people would, you know, there was not enough land. It was, it's more rocky as well. You don't have the, it's not the same diversity as you have up here.
If you're a good Arctic hunter, it's a great spot, right? Like,
yeah, and also think about the marine mammals. You know, the walrus and the whales. They would probably be too, you know, too big and too forceful to be hunted in the early days. But some types would be easier to capture, and also they would, you know, they come ashore when they die, and also they come ashore by their own mistakes, navigational mistakes. So we have a lot of whalebone use in the Iron Age, and seals, huge. You know, when you think about the energy source, the fat, it would be very important for their diet.
And they're delicious.
Yeah.
I mean,
and they're cute, so
I feel like I could get a seal, because I'm not the best hunter, but I feel like a seal I could get, because
I wouldn't want to just try to get a seal, my friend.
how quick can they be?
Fierce. They can be kind of fierce.
I'm just thinking of like the cute white ones, and I'm like, I could.
That's because that's the Labrador stuff. That has nothing to do with the proper Arctic. That's all Greenpeace that has warped your mind, my friend.
So I couldn't just catch a seal.
Wouldn't say that you could.
In the beginning, there were a lot of seals here, but they, of course, they learn fast, so they moved away, and then they learned not to lie on the beach, but rather find the rocks out in the sea, and you know, throw their youngs on those rocks instead. And eventually, like in the area here, a lot of species disappeared. We have some, I think it's a gray seal in English. We have it still, but it's not the same as it was in the Iron Age. Also the walrus and no, but it's a rich area. And also when you think about being a farmer, and you know, in the winter time, the coastal area doesn't freeze. So you would have these small plants, like the plants that stay green whole year round. They would be growing there in that region. So your sheep and goats could walk there like almost year round, get their own food. And that would be, of course, very, very handy.
It does. It actually sounds very rich in resources. Very different to what I was expecting. I guess you say with a whale, there's a lot. A whale's a big thing. There's a lot of stuff you can do with that, and I assume they traded. So again, was the North seen as a single kingdom, or was it different tribes that just got along, or did they war amongst each other?
Yeah, well, everything you said is true. So you can. It's around the 3rd century, so 200 AD, that we see that these groups, these kind of family groups, they start to get bigger, and they start to become groups of people from more different families, and they start to become socially layered. So we notice this, for example, in the grave material, where you can see differences between people buried very poorly and people buried with prestige items. So you can see that yeah, there's this social division, and it gets more and more visibly in the archaeological records throughout the Iron Age. And so how we look at this today is that we call it friendship ties. It's not really a friendship like you have today with a friend. It is more a transactional, formal bond you have with a person. So you can imagine maybe with oath swearing and loyalty being a huge part of this, where the chieftain would provide security, protection, and the farmer connected to him, the leader of the household, would provide him with resources. So perhaps a part of his yearly harvest, you know. So you can imagine these networks of farmers being connected to a chieftain, and also these farmers having relationships like the friendship ties with each other, supporting each other, and this was the whole foundation of these units. And then they got bigger and bigger and bigger, and sometimes through alliances, sometimes through war, or yeah, so you have different methods, but the outcome was in the north is that you can see that it gets like the region is just expanding. So it starts around where I live right now. There is one theory even that the Lade lineage came from here, from Åsa, on the island of Andøya, where I live, and that they expanded. So I am just above Lofoten, and it's very interesting to see that these I know, have you talked about the thing, yeah?
Yes.
Or no, it's like
been
this
mentioned once in a while.
Yeah.
it's like this meeting place concept, you could say, where everything like political, judicial, social, religious, everything would be discussed. And these courtyard sites, as we call them today, they are found throughout, and you can study them to see how a political area expanded throughout time. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting too much into those details. But to go back to the point, you can see it's expanding and getting bigger and bigger. And then the chieftains, at one point in time, they called themselves or were called kings. So suddenly you have another division. So you have the slaves, farmers, and then you have the chieftains. And then at some point, the sources talk about kings and about jarl, and you get these different titles. It's difficult for us to know exactly what the titles meant, but most importantly, it just meant that there was another layer, another, someone even bigger. And what happened is that the powerful family, they traveled further south, so it became like a big network. So they had their chieftains loyal to them along the whole coast, and then in the end, at the start of the Viking Age, they had secured a safe trade route from the south to the north, the whole coast. They had all their connections to the interior, and their resource base was enormous. They would get anything, and then the trade centers would distribute it over the whole network.
Sounds
so
complicated.
it became like a big block, like the north. So in the Viking Age, you would have different kings fighting it out in the south, like the round part of Norway, the south. And then you would have this shape of Norway where you would have Trøndelag, very powerful also in the Viking Age, producing a lot of iron. and likely importing it or exporting it to us, everything to the north. And then the north would provide with all the resources, like the gold from the north. So the Arctic animals. Back then, the furs from these winter animals, it was so valuable, both in Norway and also in Europe, that it was just, yeah, the amount of prestige items coming back is for us today very difficult to understand. But it was huge. So Northern Norway was a big block.
We can see one of the things that was probably a major industry from at least the late Iron Age is walrus hunting, which starts in Northern Norway. And then when the walruses are depleted, they move to Iceland. Like we know now that Iceland had a walrus population before the Vikings showed up. Just like they also had trees before the Vikings showed up.
And Greenland. Eventually,
yes.
The walrus was very big in Greenland. Yeah,
exactly. And they also have to move farther and farther up along the coast in Greenland. And I mean, we can see, of course, we know from the items that we find in medieval Bergen, for instance, that this was a major source of riches in Western Norway. I mean, I think it's very obvious that the North has simply been one of those places where you can amass a huge amount of wealth, and at the same time also be shielded enough from all of those skirmishes among all the power-hungry, greedy people in the southern parts, right?
Yeah, it's insane when you look at the like the archaeological remnants of this. It almost feels industrial, like the proportions of it. Those pits used for extracting the oil from the walrus, the areas are huge, and they have a lot of pits. Like the amount of people working there and collaborating, and the yearly fisheries. It's like there was this system where huge amount of people came to it was so organized, and it was huge. It's also the same with the reindeer, the wild reindeer from back then. You have these systems of pits and outposts and leading fences over huge areas where big, like, herds were driven into lakes and from edges, and like mass hunting, mass trapping. And when you look at the small farms in that area, it's like, how did they have the manpower? It's like you have these cute farmsteads there. So a chieftain would be very very good at organizing and gathering huge group, like a man force to execute these missions, and likely together with the Sámi, likely a joint venture to get these resources.
Yes, and also, so just for clarification, for anybody who's listening to this and thinking about, well, what is actually the size of this area and all that stuff, I would encourage anyone who's curious about those kinds of things to go to the site thetruesize.com, where you can actually compare country sizes around the world. And one of the things that you note, if you take Norway and then place it on the east coast of the United States, it stretches from approximately New York to Florida. That's how big it is for any Americans who need any comparison here. That's kind of large, So
it's a big place.
That is a big place.
So are the Sámi just a single tribe within the north, or is it like a bunch of different tribes that are just come under that title?
It would be different tribes. It's, as I said, difficult to put them in a category. For me, the easiest thing is to think about the language.
Okay.
So you had these tribes. Some of them spoke a language connected to the Uralian family, others to the Germanic family. So it's like before Norse came into being.
Okay.
So that would be a good separation. But of course, language from that time didn't reflect in the sources. So archaeologists, they try to find indicators like, like the fashion statements.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, that would be traded. It would be given to the others as a gift, as a token of appreciation. And it's a mixture. So something that archaeologists do is that they look at the whole site. So not just one building site, but like a big area. And then they can say a bit more about how to label it. So what we see, these Sámi tribes, they lived in different areas compared to the Norse tribes. So the Norse tribes very typically here in the north located themselves along the outer coast. So and then along the rivers going inland. But when you look at the marshes and like the mountain slopes and the interior, there we have a lot of Sámi settlements. Mm-hmm. And it reflects a different lifestyle. And even though also Sámi people came to the coast and also were part of the fishing tradition, they very smartly adapted to the huge request, the huge demand for these hunting goods, which were so valuable and so seem as exquisite further south, that they just specialized in getting that and trading it with the Norse chieftains, and those Norse mm-hmm. chieftains then traded it with southern chieftains and also Europe and England and etc. So you get this specialization, like two different lifestyles, two different ways of utilizing the resources.
So a couple of things when I teach about this subject in college. One of the things about Sámi today is that Sámi ethnicity and self-identification, all of these aspects, have sort of been forced into fixed categories thanks to Nordic nationalisms in different ways. So you have Norwegians and Swedes and Finns, all trying to figure out who they are through the 17 and 1800s. And that has major implications for Sámi, and especially because Sámi in the north, in Norway and Sweden and Finland, live in nomadic lifestyles, so they will be crossing the borders, and that especially to Norway becomes a huge problem in terms of border integrity in a time where you're like, Sweden, please fuck off. We in the 19th century, after the era of Danish dominance in Norway. So there's a lot of modern also colonial complications involved here, and mm-hmm. Purposeful cultural and sometimes even bordering ethnic genocide on the Sámi as well. And so in modern times, the Sámi have then come together and trying to identify themselves as a ethnic group of some kind, under this concept of Sámi Etnan, which has then eventually turned into Sápmi, the Sámi territories that have some kind of internal sovereignty and also cross the border between Sweden and Norway and Finland. There are also Sámi in Russia, but they're sort of left out of the scheme because the Russians are notoriously difficult to deal with when it comes to what they call sparse populations. That's what we would call indigenous peoples. So the Sami in Russia have as far as I can see, historically, still a much harder time. Whereas now you see Sami have gained a lot of, political rights that are still being violated in different ways, nonetheless. But better.
Yeah, today there's a big, movement or like feeling. Also politically, you can see it very clearly where Sami heritage is, protected. Kids in school, they learn about the Sami. It's very highlighted that this is part of our, our country. And it's true that, what happened in 1900s, it's a very dark, terrible thing. And it's especially because it's not that long ago. So it's difficult. At the same time, I think it's important not to forget the biggest part of history where, the Norse and the Sami population lived together. And sometimes, the terrible things from more recent history, it kind of, casts a shadow on the early things. But I think it's important to realize the beginning, because when you look at these sites, you can see that here where I live, in along the coast, the islands here, it's such a small distance. It's like 1 or 2 kilometers in between. So they had a lot of contacts. They weren't isolated at all. And you can imagine these long-lasting friendship ties between chieftains and the Sami, and learning each other's language, and being very much integrated with each other. And then, of course, you have the end of the Viking Age where, Norway becomes unified, and then in the medieval periods, then we start. Then it gets worse. Then you have these the tax system that comes, and then it's a taxation on the Sami, and you have them being pressured out of areas, and you have these 2 clashing ways of life, because the Sami, I try to. It's strange because here in Norway, when you look at everything that is published online, it's a lot of focus on the negative, on the of course the latest history, and it should be, we should learn about that, but we shouldn't forget that in the beginning we were collaborating, and it's the whole basis for the population.
That's really interesting. I mean, am I way off in thinking, or can you draw comparisons with how Native Americans have been sort of treated in the USA? It's to me, like I say, someone coming from, I guess, from a very ignorant standpoint, it sounds very similar.
There are certain aspects of the treatment of the Sami in the 19th century, early 20th century that are very similar. Like, for instance, residential schools. You're being forbidden to speak your language. If you do speak your language in school, you'll get beaten. Those kinds of things that have left a massive scar on the Sami population today. I personally find the history fascinating, and I'm well aware of the connections and the influence, the cultural influence that Sami had on Germanic-speaking populations in the Iron Age and the Viking Age. Great example is Vosslings in Sweden, where you have sort of like proto-Viking Age boat burials with Sami tents on them as a great example of a mixed cultures. But on the other hand, we also have that more recent history, which is still the main problem and issue for modern Sami, who are still not having their rights respected in many ways. There was just in 2018, there was a case in Norway that had to go to the international court, as far as I remember, where the Norwegian government demanded of a Sámi reindeer herder that he culled half of his herd because it was, hurting the flora of the tundra. And it's like they wouldn't do that to some farmer in Sutton. They wouldn't tell him to shut down production of half of his farms, right? Because it was, I don't know, putting too much nitrate out in the fjord, and thereby killing the fish population.
Yeah.
So those kinds of things are still happening. There's still a lack of attention to the lifestyle, right? And that's a really important real world issue that Sámi have right now, right? But I mean, it's important to understand that prior to Christianity, primarily, right? There was I guess you could call it a kind of equilibrium, right, where you had a more equitable interaction between the population groups in Scandinavia.
Yeah, it's probably you scratch my back, I scratch your back. If I've got something to give you, you've got something to give me. We don't care what each other believes because we're both getting a little bit of something from it. Yeah,
and you don't have a lot of hangups, right? But the Sámi become, and the reason I'm highlighting Christianity here is that the Sámi become inscribed in Norwegian law in the 13th century primarily as the ones who are primarily responsible for heathenry and witchcraft and that kind of stuff. So that Sámi as a population become more and more ostracized in a very negative sense, right? And that sort of, precipitates into future centuries.
Do they ever convert to Christianity or?
Yeah.
Okay.
But only so what we see is that there's a huge push from the late 1600s from the Danish king, when we're speaking about Norway, to Christianize the North. They are sort of in a sense Christianized, right? But they have a lot of local traditions and a lot of that stuff. So the Danish king starts sending more and more missionaries or priests or whatever you want to call them up there. And then that in the 1700s gets even worse, because Denmark also becomes a pietist country. It's the sort of the only country that adopts fully the pietist movement, which is a North German Protestant movement. And that is sort of that is a very Puritan type of Christianity, which is against everything. Stop being human, pretty much, and there you go, right? And that has some serious implications for the Sámi. And then you also have local preachers up there, and one of them is Los Estadios, who sort of becomes a sort of like a grandfather of a type of Lutheranism that is adopted among the Sámi, which is very anti-alcohol, for instance.
Okay.
And there's still many Sámi who identify as Lestadians.
It seems they held on for quite a while compared to the Christianization of the south of Norway happens in, help me out?
In the late 900s, my friend.
That's exactly what I was thinking, but I just didn't want to say it. So you're talking, they held on for what, 500-600 years?
Well, yeah, I mean, it really depends on how you want to define being Christian and not being Christian, because I'm sure that, in the 1300s, if you encounter some Sámi person and ask them, are you Christian? They would probably say yes. They had probably been in contact with the church in some way or another, right?
Probably learned to lie. Just nod your head and say, yeah. Until they
plenty of people around the world who have learned to lie, my friend, on that,
exactly.
With that specific one. But yeah, so but you also have just like the continuation of local practices, right? Which you also had in the the early conversion period among the sedentary Scandinavians, the Germanic speaking ones, right? In the 900s, in the 1000s, the 1100s, 1200s, even, you have syncretism in different ways, a direct interpretation of Christianity based off of the pre-Christian religion, right? And that is the same in the north. That is the same among the Sámi. But then that gets cast as like evil heathenry later on, right?
Yeah, it's interesting studying Christianization everywhere actually, because it always adapts some of the local traditions and the beliefs. It always very strongly goes after some, main points to get it away. Like horse meat was one of the very was high on the political agenda. But other things, it's adapted into Christianity, and that is, you can see that everywhere, especially in the early time when you look at there's this famous runestone. I think it's in Yelling, where you have this picture of a chieftain, and it's you have this development where a chieftain is showcased with these symbolic elements, being a chieftain, like with a sword, and then it kind of transfers to more like a Christian king, and it's a very fun thing to see, like how the icons change. So also Jesus was not like the first impressions of him. It looks like a chieftain, like the almighty chieftain, and then you can see how it changes and becomes more recognizable as Christian for us today in early medieval time. But that's a very cool thing to actually to find those early impressions, those early ornamentations of Christian things, and then see the overlap with the Viking traditions and the Viking way of looking at Christianity. But it was introduced in that way, like you have this all-powerful chieftain, which is more powerful than the local gods. So he kind of gets adapted and introduced on the premises of the Old Norse religion. So it's a very interesting, But,
a great example for anybody who's interested in reading a sort of like a narrative that's based off of that translation from like Christ into sort of like a chieftain with badass little castle and sword, and the apostles are his warriors, all that stuff. You should read the old Saxon gospel, Heliand, where the whole story about Jesus and all that stuff is like taking place in Northern Europe, and Jesus is like this warrior with a sword and everything. It's pretty cool.
There you go. Okay, so I just want to quickly recap for my own mind, and hopefully for anybody else, because we haven't really spoken about this topic before. So geographically, we have the Nordic peoples in the south of Norway, and then up along the coast. Am I right with that? And then inland, kind of in the mountain regions, are the Sámi.
But now you say Nordic, and it's something else. It's Norse, I think you mean.
Oh, now
Nordic
I'm getting my
is
panties.
like the Nordic countries, and
I'm getting my panties in a twist.
I try not to use the word Norse
when it comes to the word Norse.
Matthias tells me off if I use the word Norse. So
yeah. So in the south,
but you're excused because you're Dutch.
In the south, they were more isolated, and also very far up in the north, they were more isolated. But then in this area where I am, along the coast, all those islands, the distance was very short. So you have these, these areas where they are intertwined. But it's very difficult to give this general impression, because it's very you have these local differences. I think so Norway populated by groups, tribes, some identifying as Norse, others as Sámi, but at that time they didn't use these words, of course. They didn't put their label like we do. But they identified with their own tribe, and probably of course they understood that there was if they met a different tribe belonging to a different language group, but they still would see each other as like tribes, you know, so they could be friends with those Norse tribes, but then enemies with those Norse tribes.
Okay, I guess
And
to
then
put
the same
it,
with the
I think
Sami. So it's tribal. Yeah.
just
I
to
think
put it
the
a different
best-
way.
So I think the best terminology for this is Germanic speaking
That's
Scandinavian
exactly what I was gonna.
and Sami.
Yeah.
So
you can call them Norse, but that's a problematic misnomer when it comes to prior to 1100, because the word doesn't really apply before the 1100s, where you have to split between West Nordic and East Nordic.
Yes.
But I mean, the term Nordic is sort of more inclusive nowadays for everybody who lives in that region in general. So that's why it's also not really working out that well to say these Nordic peoples and then the Sami, because the Sami are also Nordic people.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So okay, to rephrase, so you have the Germanic speaking peoples in the south and up the coast, and then you have the Eurasian speaking Uralian speaking peoples in kind of the hills, and that would be the Sami people.
And the marshes and the interior.
Okay.
Yeah. But
Yeah. So
the
inland.
main point is that they were mixed as well.
No, absolutely. I'm just trying to kind of get a general idea for people listening and for myself. Okay. So do we know what the Sami believed in compared to the Germanic speaking people? Because obviously we have an idea, I guess, of Nordic mythology and that kind of stuff. Are the Sami believing in the same thing, or is it completely different?
Well, today we study it as a different religion.
Okay.
We label it as a different religion. It's of course not without difficulty to pinpoint exactly what the religion was about, but there are some things, some highlights, and interestingly or logically, it shows a lot of similarities with other religions from the polar region, like from other countries as well, other continents. It's very interesting to study that. But basically, they had so they also believed in different gods in the same way as the Norse did. But a big thing with the Sami religion is that they had this, how do you say that in English, embodiment of natural obstacles, like a big rock formation having giving it a soul, if you understand what I mean. Like it was more attached to nature compared to the Norse, perhaps. If I
is
would
that
have
animism?
to,
That would be animism. I would have to disagree. I would have to disagree in terms of that it was more attached to nature than the Germanic speaking people's religions.
Yeah, it's difficult, but if you would, because also in the Norse religion you have a lot of usage of natural formations as offering sites. So it's
I think
it's difficult.
I think
But
what we see as sort of like if we can say a major difference between the two is that what we see is that the Germanic speaking peoples they start centering or focusing their religion around chieftains from the 500s and onwards. So we get these centers of power where religious activity is also focused, and you get quote unquote temple sites as well emerging, right? So that's a sort of like a governmental aspect that where the religion is then included, which you don't see with Sami, right?
Yeah, but yeah, it's true. The Sami wasn't as layered. The hierarchy wasn't in the same way there. And of course, in the Norse population, the chieftains was not just a political leader, it was also a religious leader, a social leader. It would have this mixture of roles. But on the other hand, there are some theories that there were religious experts, both in the Norse and in the Sami culture, which also could be, which also show similarities. Even the shamanism, which is a big part of the Sámi religion. You could even, find that also in the Norse religion. So it's difficult because, of course, the names of the gods and how the gods are described, their their attributes, their backstories, they feel very different. So it feels like two very different religions. But when you look at it more like from above, you have a lot of similarities, both in practices and in what is considered to have a religious layer to it, so, or a value. So a lot of natural formations in both religions are being used. But I think,
judging from the written sagas, they are of course a poor source to religion and a lot of other things. But judging from what they're saying in terms of like or describing in terms of like what a völva is and the type of rituals that the völur would have, that looks like that is a technique that has probably come straight from the Sámi, right? That the Germanic speaking peoples in Scandinavia has sort of like adopted and learned, and possibly quite often the specialists would be Sámi, right? You see this situation of like going to the Sámi to like learn things about divination and stuff like that primarily. And you also even see lost and for making that illegal later on in the 13th century. So they, I think, in a pre-Christian context, looks like the Sámi were very much respected for their abilities with these things, with this that stuff that we could call shamanism, right? In sort of a it's it's hard to define what that technique is,
It's very difficult, especially because today we have our modern viewpoints, and then we try to kind of put it on something from way back then, and the archaeological record doesn't really give this division at all. It gives more it gives a picture of complete mixtures and adoptions and adaptations and hybrids. So it's and of course we like to organize, we like to pinpoint what was the difference, what characterizes, what is, but it's not that easy with the early history. So
do you think it's likely, because you said that there's similarities and there's differences, that both these religions started out in the same place, and then in the same way that the languages, I guess, split and went different directions and then ended up coming back together from the south and the north of Norway, that the religions almost come back together?
Well, it's such a difficult topic, because you can trace people's movements through DNA or ethnicity, or you can use language, and you have these. So when you have the Sámi and the Germanic people, of course, their split was very early on, developing very different language families. But
I'm just wondering, even back at that original
beginning,
point,
everybody came from one group. So it just depends how far back in time are you willing to go.
That's what I'm wondering. If
are we going to Africa, or
if back at that original point, maybe the religion was the same, and then as they split, the same religion got split, and then they then adapted it into their own ways.
It's so difficult, because people spread in groups, from the very moment, they existed. And then way later, some of these groups, came from different directions, but so much time has passed. So it's almost an impossible question.
So if you look
their
at it
religion and their language had changed along the way in very extensive ways already.
If you look at it in terms of like zones and regions, You mentioned, for instance, that the Sámi traditions, they belong to what we call the Circumpolar Sphere, right? We can say that about a lot of Scandinavian culture in general. When we look at Danish and Swedish and Norwegian, now we call them that, but that was of course not what they were back in the Iron Age. These traditions, there are certain aspects of them we can easily see it influence from that circumpolar cultural sphere, and there are aspects that we can see that we can easily identify as influence from, say, the Mediterranean area, and even beyond that, right? So, you know, the Viking Age monumentalism, like the rune stones and all that stuff, that's something that the Vikings, they're like, or Scandinavians in the Viking Age, let's not call them Vikings, because they weren't all Vikings. They're looking at what's happening down south. They're looking at what's happening in Rhineland, what's happening in the French area, what's happening in the English area, and they're like, we want cool monuments too. And that's how they make those, right? And then the same way, when they start building, like they really go hard at, like, let's build temple complexes or whatever we want to call them. They're looking at Charlemagne. They're looking at what he's building in Aachen, right? His nice little castle there. Like there are theories about, especially the site at Tisø in Denmark, that is like directly sort of like an attempt to copy sort of a blueprint of that in a sort of you know, I live in a hut version of it, right? And then you know, you can also find so many other interesting things, like in the creation story in Völuspá, for instance, that gives us like these few details about how the world might have been created. That story looks very similar to what we find in the Kalevala and what we find in Siberian traditions and even in North American traditions. And then we also can see, you know, other ideas circulating, you know, in folk tales all over Scandinavia. You have the idea that seals, they have a person inside them, right? So the idea that, you know, sometimes you meet a naked lady on the beach somewhere, and that's because she's taken her seal coat off, right?
Isn't that especially strong in like Ireland and like Scotland?
It is also, it's also very strong in Ireland and Scotland. There are plenty of Norwegian and Danish folktales and Icelandic folktales about this as well, and Greenlandic, Inuit folktales about it. You have Inuit folktales about it in Nunavut as well. So obviously there's like a lot of like crossovers and interactions culturally, and that's, I think, is a very important thing to keep in mind as well. That these things, they don't have to necessarily be ancient all the time. They could have been exchanged much more recently as well.
And of course the runes, you know, it wasn't a Viking Age invention. You know, it was from way earlier in the Iron Age, probably the 1st century AD, and it was shared among all the Germanic tribes. So it wasn't even, you know, it's not even the Norwegians or
and most recent inscription from the Czech Republic also has Slavic inscriptions with runes. So now we also have Slavic peoples using runes.
But the one cool thing is that, you know, all the other countries were Christianized very early, so they adopted the Latin script, and they stopped using the runes at a very early age, while in Scandinavia they didn't, and they could continue using the runes and also develop them. So you have this huge development of course, the language, and then also the runes themselves reflecting that. And you have then different runic ways of writing, different styles, different dialects. And of course, then when the Vikings traveled across, you know, on their expeditions, they brought with them the runes. So then you can find those everywhere. But that's the one cool thing. That's the runic writing system continued here and gives us a unique source material to be able to study it. You know, we have newer sources than from the continent. but it's yeah, no, but it's something that is way older than most people realize, and was shared, you know, like the religion and the religious ideas among all Germanic tribes.
Perfect. I think that's the show. I think we're done. Unless there's anything else you feel we should know about the north of Norway.
Come visit. It's very beautiful.
You have great cod.
Yeah. My house is very big. No, but no, it's a great country. It's very expensive living though, like land and houses and I don't know, it's all cheap, but the good stuff in life, like alcohol and cigarettes and stuff like that, very expensive. So yeah, even food. Yeah.
So we can.
But don't come here for the food and the wine, but come here for the nature. Perfect.
So we can buy our podcast house cheaply, but we can't party there cheaply.
Oh, dude, we'll just have to we'll take a boat and then we'll load it up with goods from England and we'll just sail it over, and there you go.
Yeah, you're allowed to, I think, 2 liters so hard, like whiskey. That's it.
That's not gonna last that long.
It's Norway. There are a lot of regulations.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
We'll both get arrested for trying to smuggle across in a dinghy, and they'll be like, "What have you got in there?" Which we're like, "Oh, beer." They'll be expected to find cocaine or heroin, but which like just cases of beer.
We have boglands. Why not like make whiskey here? Would be
right.
perfect.
Yeah.
Like start we can beat those.
There is a reason that people go to Sweden to buy their food and to Denmark to buy beer. The Danes go to Germany to buy beer, and you know that's how the migration is like throughout Europe.
Yes,
true. It's changed. Oh, how it's changed.
Yeah.
Perfect. Helena, is there anything you want to shout out, plug, where people can find you, find your social medias?
Sure. You can find me at Viking Helena, Viking.Helena, and I'll make a discount for anybody listening here. And Mathias will put that in the text later on, so so you guys can find it. Yeah. And because so you can get a discount on the book I wrote about a typical settlement. Iron Age settlement in the coastal region. It's
oh, perfect. Absolutely. We were. Oh, you got it there.
Yeah, I did some reading before, so I have
perfect. No, we will. Shan will make sure he puts that in the. Don't give Mathias the credit. He doesn't do that kind of stuff. Oh. He just comes, sits here, looks pretty, and says stuff. Shan is the man behind the scenes. So he will put it in the show notes. He will tag the book and let people know what the discount is, and we can hopefully send people to pick it up.
Shan is definitely the man. Yeah, no, I'm just a big fat loudmouth over here.
According to the last show, though, I have a lot of trust in him because I don't know if he even does his job. I just know that the episodes come out and I've never listened back to it, so he could make me sound awful.
It's just static. That's it.
He could just change my voice to a chipmunk or something every week.
I really hope he does.
Which he probably is going to do just for this last segment or something. Mathias, where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram by my name. It's just Nordvik.
Yeah, it's too good for Facebook these days.
Absolutely.
It's after we kept sending everyone to send you friend requests.
Pretty much, yeah. It was like, better delete this.
All right. If you enjoy the show, please take a minute to leave us a 5-star rating and a positive review, preferably on iTunes, because it really helps us bump up the chart. It helps new people find the show. If you want to support us a little bit further, Patreon is the best way, so we can get that house in Norway. That's going to be the new goal to aim for.
I'm down, man.
We've got a long way to go. So everybody, please pop over to Patreon /Nordic Mythology Podcast. We have a bunch of different tiers. You get different things for each tier. most importantly, for every tier, you get to jump in and watch the show live. You can jump in on the live chat. There's always a good little bit of banter going on in there. You can also ask your questions live that we pick up on. Also, you get a bonus show every week. So alternate weeks, me and Mathias either sit down and do a Vikings watch along show where we watch an episode of the show, Vikings TV show, and let you know what's real, what's not real, and just have a good laugh. And on the other week, we do a Saga episode where Mathias has been reading the Saga, but we're going to get guest readers in to read the Saga, and Mathias will kind of let you know. Again, we'll talk over the Saga, let you know what's going on. We're finishing the Saga of the Vosslings next, I think.
Yes, I think we are getting close to the end.
I think we're getting to the good part where Sigurd enters the scene to slay the dragon.
Yes, we're getting close.
So yeah, I think that's going to be next week's episode. Jonas Lorentzen, I think he's going to come and read for us in his very posh voice. So he's going to come and read the Saga whilst me and you get to just have a laugh and talk about it. So if you pop over to Patreon, you can get access to them. They're Patreon exclusive episodes. But in short, you get a bonus episode every week if you support us on Patreon. You can also pop over to northernmythologypodcast.com and you can pick up a t-shirt. I now have ownership back of the website. Still have no idea what happened or why I lost ownership, but I do have it back now. So you will actually get what you buy. So I apologize to everybody that's taken a little bit of time to get them sent out. But yeah, it was a pain in the ass. Other than that, I think I've got everything apart from Northern Mythology Podcast on all the social medias. I feel like my rant's getting longer at the end of every show now.
They kind of are.
I really want the house in Norway, so just fuck everything else and just go to Patreon and support the show. All right. Thank you, Helena. Thank you very much for this. This has been a fun one.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.